Hey everyone, what's up? This is Uri for Gorilla Poker, and in this video I'm gonna do another high-stakes hand history review. This one is played between two elite high-stakes players at 2550 on PokerStars. FourSixFour versus Nacho. Interesting hand, starts with an overbet. Yeah, let's just get into the action. So button 464 raises to 125, 2.5x, which is the standard button size. You should default to this if you don't have a reason to do anything else. And Nacho defends the big blind. And at this point, we have regular ranges for button versus big blind, which you guys should be very, very aware of at the stakes that you're playing, because there are thresholds in these ranges of what's the bottom offsuit hand that in position raises, and what are the hands that out of position defends. And these type of things mean that there are going to be very big differences sometimes between a 7 high board and an 8 high board and a 9 high board, which you wouldn't be aware of otherwise. So 963 two-tone board, Nacho checks, and 464 fires a 120% pot-sized overbet. Now, this might be in practice an uncommon sizing. If I had to guess, theoretically it's a very good sizing. More importantly, we want to figure out, what is the sizing trying to do? What is it based around? Because each sizing you can choose serves around maximizing EV for a different portion of your range. Going for the flop overbet is basically maximizing for a hand like pocket tens on 963 two-tone, where pocket tens is ahead enough, it wants to get stacks in, it benefits from protection, and by betting bigger, you're kind of cleaning out future streets, you get floated less. So yeah, starting out with an overbet makes a ton of sense for tens, jacks, queens, ace nine, all these types of hands. And plan is going to be built around those hands. Now Nacho decides to go for a check raise. Check raise seems fine, and the check raise range is going to be based around mostly hands that beat pocket 10. So we're talking two pairs and sets, 9-6 suited, maybe 6-3 suited, pocket 3s, pocket 6s, pocket 9s in case they were not 3-bet. So these are going to be the meat of the value check raise range. Of course, for bluffs, we're going to take a bunch of different hand types, but mostly draws in this case. Turn ace of spades, and it's important to think about the ace and how it interacts with ranges. So ace is not really prevalent in either player's range, right? Nacho shouldn't be check raising a ton with hands that have an ace, and 464 shouldn't be overbetting flop a ton to begin with hands that have an ace. So the ace in the context of the action here is actually a relative brick. You have to be very focused on ranges, I think, to realize that. Very, very often in these situations, the ace favors the in-position player. Like had 464 bet small and gotten check raised, he's now floating with a bunch of ace highs, and those improve and dynamics kind of shift around. But in this case, probably not so many c-betting to begin with. So yeah, ace not a very important card. Nacho fires with a 2/3 turn bet, and often in check raise pots you'll see a bigger turn bet, but in this instance, given the big flop bet, stack to pot ratio is different. So I'm guessing this is probably right around fine. And yeah, I'm going to continue. Probably most of his value range or all of it is still fine. Some of his draws. So kind of standard stuff from Nacho. We kind of know what range to put him on. 464 makes the call. He's going to have a bunch of draws, a bunch of, mostly bluff catchers. And if you think of the bulk of his range as being like 10s plus over pairs, and ace is not necessarily going for the overbet on the flop, he's going to have to do, let's say, some calling and some folding with the over pairs, and probably prefer to call the higher ones. 8 of spades river doesn't change a ton, but if we want to think who's it better for, well, it completes 7-5 that both players have. It completes 10-7 that I think neither player has very often. It improves 9-8 that neither player has very often. So it's, again, kind of deceptively speaking, a bit of a bricky card. It just improves 7-5 and 7-8 mostly. But yeah, that is definitely kind of an improving card for out of position in this context where like a decent part of his open-enders either got there or turned into a pair, right? The only thing is it's just the suited open-enders. I guess 7-8 maybe offsuit, depending on the rake structure. Come to think of it, 8 hits Nacho a lot, probably a very high betting frequency card for him. Might even be a card he gets to bluff some busted flush draws. But yeah, he checks 4-6-4, checks back, which he's going to do very, very, very often given what his range looks like. And we see a showdown with Nacho showing 5-10 of hearts, which, you know, is fine to check raise on flop. It's fine to barrel on turn, although probably fine to check on turn. You can't barrel all your draws, and this isn't a strong one. And, you know, it's probably a river bluff, if I had to guess. Feels like a very, very good river bluff. The 10 and the 5 for blocking 5-7 and 10-7, the two straights that got there. You have a card that completes straight draws, which kind of forces you into bluffing flush draws. Just looks like a super standard bluff. I'm surprised Nacho gave this one up. 4-6-4 shows up with pocket kings with a heart, which I think on flop is probably not a super high frequency c-bet when you pick the sizing scheme. I think that's more 10s through queens and ace-9, but probably mixes a bit. I can see it getting in there sometimes, but generally as the overpair gets higher, it starts to check back more when you're using these huge bets. Turn, like I said, you need to call some of the overpairs. This seems like a really good one to call, so very standard stuff, and similar for the river. You could consider value betting kings. Again, you're going to have a bunch of, you know, Jack 10 of hearts, Queen 10 of hearts, and Nacho's going to have, you know, 10-8 and 7-8 sometimes. So in that context, kings can be a value bet along with those bluffs. So I don't think it's a terrible value bet. In practice, I don't know how a solver would play the spot. Solvers have these weird things going on sometimes. But yeah, I mean, in practice, king's probably a nice value bet there. So yeah, I guess I have issues with how both players played. So in the spirit of the last videos, let's load up a quick PioSOLVER sim. Note that I use single sizing strat in some of these spots because a guy who's betting 120% flop generally is not using other sizing. So if you start having a sim that has multiple sizings on GTO Wizard or whatever, you're kind of looking at the wrong spot. Practically speaking, you're looking at a theoretical spot that never happens. So I strongly recommend to simplify your game trees, especially on the flop, to the sizing that was actually used, which is why we have the 120% and the 3x check raise. So in this spot, like I said, the betting range is based around ace-9 and 10s plus as overpairs. Ace is doing a lot of checking back, king's a tiny bit, so well played flop by 4-6-4. And against this bet, Nacho gets to check raise with some of his draws, 10-5 of hearts certainly among them, can call a raise, and value range kind of like we discussed as well. And yeah, standard stuff so far, facing the check raise. Interestingly enough, kings can also just click back and get more money in and, you know, stack off. Not a play a lot of guys would make, but yeah, I guess given a big c-bet, there's less behind. You just kind of close your eyes and pile it in sometimes. But yeah, in this instance, calling and going to see a turn. Note again the flop calling range and how it doesn't contain many ace-x. So ace of spades turn, Nacho certainly can keep firing for a 66% bet, good bet size. Doesn't have to slow down a ton given the ace, and a hand like 10-5 of hearts is actually apparently pushing it too far, but you know, these are not super crucial things. So, you know, 4-5 and 7-5 and 7-8 get to keep betting, and 10-4 of hearts gets to keep betting and 10-5 of hearts doesn't. And these are the kind of nuances that are easy to see when you're studying a solution, and you can dig into like, what's the difference between 10-4 and 10-5? Why is one a good bluff and one not? But you have to be able to generalize these things to get any use out of them. and they change between board and range versus range, so they're not necessarily super important, and I wouldn't consider this a mistake in any way from Nacho to bet the 10-5 of hearts there. 10 deuce can bet and 10-4 can bet. Okay, 10-5 can bet. Apparently the 5 is worse to have, probably, when you bet, your opponent is folding the lower flush draws, and because of the button opening range, those are going to have a 5 more often than a 4 or a deuce. So these kind of crazy computer nuances that are not easy to get. But yeah, like we said, facing the turn bet in position does need to continue with a decent amount of his overpairs. 10s and jacks start mixing in more folds. Queens and kings not really, but they're not very high EV calls at this point. They're not making much money considering the pot size. Just kind of have to be there, and these hands do nicely defending in the sense that they have outs to the nuts. Like if you hit, you have a set, so they're sometimes better than a hand like a queen nine or something in very polarized range spots. Okay, so we have a bet, king's calls, and the river was the 8 of spades. 8 of spades river, probably a very strong river for Nacho's range. And there's a way to check this, actually, in PioViewer, where you hit Control H and you click out of position EV. Here you can see which rivers are good and which rivers are bad for out of position. And ace, king, queen, 10, heart are relatively low EV rivers for out of position, while the straight cards, and there's some suit magic going on here as well, which we're not going to get into, but the straight cards 4 through 8 are relatively higher EV cards, and that means you're going to have a more aggressive strategy. And on the 8 of spades, as you can see, not many busted flush draws are actually bluffing. So I was actually wrong about this, and the way that Pio decides to bluff this river is rather than bluffing busted flush draws, it's just going to keep firing with its slow pairs that don't really have much showdown value anyway. Again, this is just the natural removal effect of flush draws, and just so you guys see how nuanced these things are, if we were to change the 8 to a 7, and 7 is a better card than the 8 for out of position, suddenly bluffing busted flush draws becomes more okay. So we have 8-4 of hearts and jack-deuce of hearts bluffing, whereas on the 8, busted flush draws not really bluffing, just the 7-4 of hearts. And again, how big a difference is there between 7-4 and 10-4? So computers notice the difference, but humans like yours truly might get confused, because like 4-5 of hearts bluffs, 7-4, 5-3, 10-4 not good enough. Is it a blunder? So here we have a check, and like we were saying, or like I was saying, we're going to have a bunch of checks with hands like 7-8, or some random pairs that got there, and some give ups, and now our opponent needs to bluff, and he can actually shove with pocket 10s, which is some crazy solver magic thing, and pocket kings are close, so they rather check, but it's not terrible to bet. And again, you need these kind of bets to carry some of your bluffs, but looks like ace highs are doing most of the work for you. The ace-x of hearts hands that you get here with. Okay, so kind of to summarize, I think both players actually played the hand great. I had initial disagreements with their strat, which, doesn't seem like any of us was wrong or right. They just had cuspy hands in terms of the strategy, and it was basically just me nitpicking that the hands were played fine and well, like we said. And yeah, hope you guys learned something from this analysis. If you did, please like and subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you guys next time.